My name is Amanda Thomas. If you're following me here from TikTok, thank you so very much. I think the majority of you are here from TikTok, so thank you. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate you having here. If you're new, welcome. We're really excited to have you here as well. I do want to give a quick warning that the things that we discuss here are pretty sensitive in nature and can be very, very difficult on your mental health. So if this is something that your mental health cannot handle, go ahead and click off this video. I'll catch you somewhere else, but your mental health is so much more important than any YouTube video ever will be. Today we're going to be talking about Drew Peterson and the death of his third wife and the disappearance of his fourth wife. It is still an ongoing case as his fourth wife still hasn't been found, and I don't want this to get confused with Scott Peterson. I know I will probably confuse their names sometimes, so if you hear me say Scott, I apologize. I mean Drew. But I know when I was talking to my mom about what case I was going to be discussing this week, she immediately thought of Scott Peterson as well. So again, if you hear me saying Scott instead of Drew, I apologize sincerely. It is a mistake, my mistake, but I know a lot of times he is confused with Scott, but he is equally terrible and just awful. He's just an awful human being. So if you're interested, please stick around and we'll go into further detail about this. Drew Peterson was born on January 5th of 1954 in Bolingbrook, Illinois. He went to Willowbrook High School in Villa Park, Illinois. It was there that he met his first wife, Carol Brown, and it was after he graduated, he decided to join the U.S. Army. He did attend some college, but he moved to Virginia to train as a military police officer before moving back to Bolingbrook with his wife, Carol. It was there he took a job as a police officer in the Bolingbrook Police Department, and he started his 30-year-long law enforcement career in 1977. In 1978, he was promoted to the metro area narcotics squad, and he seemed to be a pretty successful police officer, rising up the ranks pretty quickly, and in 1979, he was even awarded the Police Officer of the Year award. Even though Drew was supposedly a good police officer, after hearing his story, I highly doubt that he was a good police officer, and I feel like he was pretty aggressive in a lot of areas in his life, not just his personal life. Drew married Carol in 1974, and they had 2 children together. It was after Carol found out that Drew was cheating on her while she was pregnant with their second child that she decided to file for divorce and leave him. The divorce was finalized in 1980, and Carol would come out in later interviews and say that during their marriage, Drew had never been physical with her or physically aggressive with her. The only thing that really ended their marriage was the fact that he had cheated on her while she was pregnant. And this lady dodged a bullet. It took Drew no time at all to rebound and jump back into the dating pool, and he soon started dating a woman named Kylie Peary. Now, again, Kylie came out later and said that that Drew was never physical with her or physically aggressive with her, but he was extremely controlling and jealous, and these were red flags that she just couldn't ignore, and so she would eventually break up the relationship. Once again, it took Drew no time at all to begin dating again. In 1982, he married a woman named Vicki Connolly. Vicki had a daughter from a previous relationship, and they all moved in together and began their family. Vicki and Drew were married for 10 years total, and Vicki would come out in later interviews and talk about how Drew was extremely physical with her and very violent. She talked about how Drew had put a gun to her on 3 separate occasions, and she also talked about an experience she had with him in their garage where he put her against the wall of the garage by her neck. He would also tell her several times that he would kill her and make it look like an accident. Fortunately, Vicki would escape this relationship with her daughter, but there would be lasting effects that both Vicki and her daughter would experience. Her daughter also talked about the violence that she had endured while she was living with Drew. Their divorce was finalized in February of 1992 after 10 years together. But once again, Drew took no time at all trying to find another wife, and he soon met Kathleen Savio. Kathleen and Drew got married in 1982. Kathleen had been an accountant before she married Drew, but after they got married, they decided to open up a bar together. This would be a bar that both of them owned. Kathleen and Drew would also go on to have 2 sons together, but things were not perfect like they would have liked it to seem. During the course of their relationship, Kathleen's sister suspected that Drew was being physically aggressive with Kathleen, but things would only get worse. In 2001, Kathleen went to the mailbox where she found a note that exposed Drew for having an affair with a 17-year-old hotel clerk named Stacy. Kathleen decided to file for divorce after this, but this divorce would get messy and it would get messy fast. There was the matter of custody over their 2 children and the revenue of their bar. Kathleen would begin telling anyone who would listen that she was afraid that Drew would kill her and make it look like an accident. But Kathleen refused to quit fighting for what she felt like she was owed for the last 11 years within their relationship. She deserved every penny of what she was fighting for, and the fact that Drew was fighting her on it just absolutely is ridiculous to me. On March 11th of 2002, Kathleen filed for an emergency protective order against Drew. She said that Drew had threatened her over the phone several times, and in the order she talks about how Drew wanted her dead and that he would burn the house down just to shut her up. Somehow, this order was dropped, this case was dropped, and Drew was left without any consequences for threatening Kathleen. It was just 4 months later that Kathleen says that Drew came to her house and threatened her once again. He asked her if she was afraid, and when she responded yes, she also said that he should just go ahead and do it already. He then took out a knife and asked her where she wanted it, and she asked for the head. But when he took out his knife, he said that he couldn't hurt her and left. Drew's side of the story is much different. Drew says that he went to Kathleen's house to discuss some things, and Kathleen had seduced him, which he had turned down and left. Kathleen had asked for help from multiple different agencies and wasn't seeming to get the help that she so desperately needed. It was in November of 2002 that she decided to reach out to the Assistant State Attorney's Office and ask them if there was anything that they could do. She told them that Drew knew how to manipulate the system and that he was trying to come for her children. In the letter, she also talked about how the Bolingbrook Police Department wasn't helping her at all, and this was the police department that Drew was currently employed at. She wasn't receiving any help from them, even though they had received 18 different calls to come to her home for DV situations that she and Drew were involved in, with Drew being the aggressor. She begged for help from multiple different agencies and didn't get anything. And on March 1st of 2004, Kathleen was found dead in her bathtub by her neighbors. She was in the semi-fetal position and there was a 1-inch cut on the back of her head. The tub was empty, there was no water in it, but her hair was still wet. After an autopsy, a medical examiner decided that it had been an accidental drowning. They ruled it an accident and the case was closed. Now, if you remember, Drew was cheating on Kathleen with a young woman named Stacy. She was just 17 years old when the affair began, and Drew was 47 years old. They got married on October 18th of 2003, and at that time, Stacy was 19 years old and Drew was 49. Stacy was working to become a nurse, and at the time of her disappearance, she was very close to finishing and getting her nursing degree. Drew and Stacy had 2 children together, and after Kathleen passed away, Stacy adopted Kathleen's 2 children and she treated them like her own. Stacy was a good human. She was just a wonderful mother and she was so dedicated to her children. So the fact that she just disappeared is all the more strange. On the outside, it seemed like Stacy and Drew had a pretty good relationship, but that was not as it seemed. Drew was extremely possessive over Stacy, and he would always have to track her via the GPS on her cell phone. He was constantly calling to see where she was at, who she was with, what she was doing. He was extremely controlling and extremely jealous of Stacy and everything that she did. But even despite knowing all of her movements at all times, when she disappeared, Drew said he knew nothing about her disappearance or where she had gone. I'm going to rewind back to March 1st of 2004 when Kathleen died. Drew was questioned in the death of his ex-wife, but he did have a pretty rock-solid alibi. Stacy had come out and said that he had been with her all night, and there was no way that it could have been him because he was at home the entire night with Stacy. But in August of 2007, Stacy decided to go to a local pastor and have a conversation with him at a Starbucks. It was during this conversation that she told the pastor that the night that Kathleen had died, she had woken up and Drew was gone. She had tried calling his cell phone a couple of times, but he didn't pick up. Drew finally did come back home a little after midnight, and he was wearing all black, and he was carrying a bag full of women's clothes that did not belong to Stacy. Stacy then told the preacher that Drew had coached her into giving him an alibi and to tell the police that he had been with her all night, even though he hadn't. Shortly after this conversation with the pastor, Stacy vanished. On October 2008 of 2007, Drew claims that he woke up and Stacy was simply gone. He says that he woke up at 11 a.m. and Stacy was gone, but she had plans to go to her sister's house that day, so he had assumed that she had just gone there. But after not hearing from her all day, and even Stacy's sister coming to the house and looking for her and not being able to reach her, Drew didn't seem too worried about Stacy's whereabouts. But then around 9 p.m., Drew came out and said that he had spoken with Stacy and she had said that she was leaving him for another man and that he would never see her again. Stacy's sister had tried getting in touch with her all day and wasn't able to, and she knew that this was extremely strange. She also knew that Stacy would never leave her children alone with Drew. So on October 29th around 4 a.m., Stacy's sister decided to report her as a missing person. Stacy's car was found at the Bolingbrook International Airport, and so many people did think that maybe she had run off with another man. But Stacy was an extremely attentive mother, and she doted on her children. She loved her children, and she loved being a mother, and her sister knew that there was no way that she would leave without her children. On top of that, Stacy's sister also knew that Stacy had asked Drew for a divorce just 3 days earlier. Police and volunteers decided to start searching for Stacy, and it took 2 weeks for police to declare Stacy's disappearance a possible homicide. It was then that they decided to take a deeper look into Kathleen's death. They exhumed Kathleen's body and decided to have a second opinion from a medical examiner's office, and that medical examiner found things that were wildly different from what the first medical examiner found. The second autopsy revealed that Kathleen had gone through a horrendous beating just before her death, and this was her cause of death. There was blunt force trauma and more damage to her head than the original medical examiner had found, and the bruises that were found on Kathleen's body, the original medical examiner had decided that those were old bruises, but the new medical examiner found that those had happened within 24 hours of her death. It was the second medical examiner's opinion that Kathleen had been murdered and then placed into the bathtub after she had passed away. And then the scene was staged to make it look like an accident. After this, several search warrants were taken out on Drew's house. There they seized all of Drew's firearms and both Stacy and Drew's vehicles. During the chaos of all of this investigation, Drew was still employed for the police department. But Drew did announce his plan to retire, and the retirement would be effective in December of 2007. On November 15th of 2007, the department voted to give Drew his pension, which was about $6,000 a month. He was allowed to keep his pension. And the reasoning behind this was they said that Drew had not been charged with any crime and it would have been illegal for them not to give him his pension. This story turned out to be an absolute media circus, and Drew seemed to be loving every minute of it and just relishing the attention that he was getting in the media, despite the majority of people thinking that he had murdered Kathleen and that he had murdered Stacy. And a lot of different things would come out. One of Drew's friends named Rick Mims sold a story to a tabloid magazine for an undisclosed amount, but he said that in 2003, he and Drew had been working for a cable company and had bought these big blue tubs. He had pictures proving that they had in fact bought these tubs, and it was then that Drew's stepbrother, Thomas Morphy, told police that he had helped Drew move one of those tubs from his house, and he believed he had helped Drew dispose of Stacy's body. Thomas did have a history of having trouble with drugs and alcohol. They did say that Thomas had tried to hurt himself in the days after helping Drew expose of what he thought was Stacy's body. He did not for a fact know what was in the blue tub, but he did think that it was Stacy's body, and this is what he told police. He also does not know where the container ended up. Now, while he does have a history of drug and alcohol abuse, that doesn't mean he's not telling the truth. I think he's telling the truth. And in fact, there are neighbors that back up the story of watching Drew and Thomas take the tub into the back of Drew's SUV. Stacy's sister wanted Drew to take a lie detector test in regards to this plastic tub, but he refused. Like I said, this case was an entire media circus, and Drew seemed to really enjoy the limelight. He would go on interviews and say just really ignorant stuff like, and I'm going to read it, "I'm not trying to be funny. Stacy asked me for a divorce on a regular basis, and it was based on her menstrual cycle. He was a horribly disgusting human being, and it seemed like he would do just about anything to stay in the spotlight. In December of 2008, he announced his engagement to another young woman who was only 23 years old, and this young woman's name was Christina Rains. Now, Christina would come out later and say that Drew was up to his old tactics. He was extremely controlling and extremely jealous and possessive of her, and it was ultimately her father who gave her an ultimatum that helped her get out of the situation. She would break up the engagement and move out of his house by January 30th of 2009. Christina's father also believes that this was just a publicity stunt to make sure that Drew stayed in the spotlight because he enjoyed it so much. But this would all change on March 7th of 2008 when Drew was arrested for Kathleen's murder. Drew was arrested and charged with her murder, but he was also ordered to stay in the county jail until the trial and all of the appeal proceedings were over. The judge ruled that Drew would be a danger to society if he was released. Jury selection was set to start in July of 2009, but the prosecution would file a motion that would end up delaying the trial for 2 whole years. But finally, in 2012, Drew's trial would begin, and it was an extremely emotionally charged trial. And it was pretty strange. The defense team would call a witness that would testify to Stacy, telling them that she was afraid that Drew would kill her. There was also a lot of hearsay that was allowed into the courtroom, and this was based on Drew's law. Now, Drew's law allows hearsay testimony into the courthouse as long as the prosecution can prove that somebody was killed in order to keep them quiet or to keep them from being able to testify. On September 6th of 2012, it would only take jurors 2 days to deliberate to find Drew guilty of murder. It wouldn't take long for Drew to try to file an appeal saying that his defense team had made mistakes and that they were incompetent and all these things, but a judge denied this appeal. And on February 13th of 2013, Drew was sentenced to 38 years in prison for the murder of Kathleen Savio. And you would think that after this, Drew would just shut up and just quietly work on his appeal if that's what he's wanting to do, but he would not do that. On February 9th of 2015, Drew was charged for trying to take out a hit of the lead prosecutor, Joel Brodsky. Sorry if I said that wrong. A fellow inmate tipped off the prosecutor's team to this, and he decided to wear a wire so that he could prove that Drew was trying to kill the lead prosecutor, Joel, and that he was trying to take out a hit from jail. He was also charged with this and sentenced again. After multiple appeal attempts, Drew's conviction still stands, and he is forced to sit out his entire term of 38 years. He has been officially transferred to a prison where he permanently stays. While Drew is behind bars and Kathleen has been given justice, there are still a lot of questions. Stacy's body has never been found, and it has been 14 years, I believe 14 years, that she has been missing. Drew's attorney has come out and said that once Drew is dead, Stacy will be found and that he knows what happened. All of this information is supposedly protected by the attorney-client privilege, but he has kind of tiptoed around the idea of maybe giving out this information. Now, I don't know if this is because he enjoys the spotlight as well or if he actually does know what happened to Stacy, but I do think that Stacy deserves justice too, and we need to continue looking for her and talking about her so that we can find her and bring her home to her family. I personally think that Stacy asked for a divorce, and since she was Drew's only alibi for the Kathleen murder, he decided to murder her as well. He got away with it once, why wouldn't he get away with it again? But it was ultimately Stacy's disappearance that led police into investigating Kathleen's murder and eventually convicting Drew, which I'm very, very thankful for, but I do wish that Stacy would be able to get the justice that she deserves. I wish that her family would be able to have the closure that they also deserve. Drew still claims that he is innocent of murdering Kathleen, that he never murdered her, so I guess if he won't admit that he murdered Kathleen, even though I'm pretty sure it's obvious that he did, he will not he will not confess to the murder of Stacy. But what are your thoughts on this? I'd love to know down below. There is more information out there on this case. If you'd want to do a little bit of digging, you can find a whole lot more to this case. But I do think that Scott is guilty and he's exactly where he belongs. I just wish that he would allow Stacy's family to have the justice that they deserve and allow Stacy to come home and be put to rest properly. But I'd love to know your thoughts on this. If you're interested, you can hit the little subscribe button down below and the little bell icon so you can be notified when I upload next, but only if you're interested. If you're not, don't worry about it. But yeah, you can also follow me on TikTok and it's just Murder Geek 7, or you can follow me on Instagram. Once again, it's Murder Geek 7. I don't post as much as I probably should on Instagram. I should probably work on that. But other than that, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today. I really appreciate you being here. And while I'm sad that these are the things that we talk about, I think they're important to talk about so people can receive the justice that they so desperately deserve. But I am sending you so much peace and love today, and I hope that you find something beautiful in today, whatever it is, and have a great morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're watching this. But yeah, I'll see you next time. Thank you again so much. Bye.